this is IBM Museum, and I'm getting prepared for my live stream tomorrow commemorating the 35th anniversary of the IBM PS2 series. Those initial models were announced by IBM on the 2nd of April, 1987. So we have 35 years that they've been out. Man, that makes me feel old. But I plan to do the live stream at my regular scheduled time. That's 10 a.m. local time to me, Mountain Standard Time. It's GMT -7. So that comes to noon Eastern Standard Time, 11 a.m. Central Standard Time, and 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. If you're outside the continental United States, you can use that GMT -7 to calculate when that will be for your time zone. Or you just go to my channel and you have the little reminder you click on, and it'll tell you exactly when I go live. So in getting prepared for that, I don't know what we're going to go through and do. I don't have my new studio up and going yet. I'm too constrained for space here, but we can likely do a lot of discussion and just reflect on how the last 35 years or what the PS2s brought in. And I do on my bench, I still have the Model 30s, that low-end 8-bit model of the PS2s that were introduced on that date. And at the very bottom, I have the Model 30 I call my Max Model 30 that is upgraded, and I mean it's still a very functional system for everything that you can do with it. On top of that, I have the planar of the revision 00 BIOS in that case, and it's a very early Model 30 planar, and it tends to be pretty minimalistic. I'm going through and in the process with clean up the case. I can get turned around and kind of point out a few points on what I'm going to do exactly with this particular video. But I went through and was cleaning on the case for this. I've got the bezels kind of scrubbed up as much as they can. Of course, my Maximal 30, I mean, it's seen some use. It's got some dinged up corners and things like that. You can see that metallicized coating in places. So this is looking pretty good for this top one. And of course, I have the cover off for this particular video. I've gone through and I've put a good 720 KB diskette drive in this spot, and it doesn't even have a hard drive or anything else like that. I don't even have SIMs, as we'll see in a moment, but this is kind of a very minimalistic Model 30 as it is, just for the fact that it's just got the diskette drive. We're not even gonna, well, I'm gonna go through and use it on this video for going through and booting the diagnostic diskette of the 7496 executive workstation, just something I happen to have on hand. That's a good way to go through and work with the clock. But the interesting thing is this is not in any way an April Fool's joke or anything like that. That Major Tom was going through and he's studying the Model 25 files. And the Model 25 is that all-in-one unit with integrated screen that was derived from the Model 30, came out later, was not in that initial PS2 release on the 2nd of April, 1987. I think it's probably even a year or more later on when the Model 25 was introduced. And with adding the integrated screen, the one thing is the Model 25 did not have a real-time clock on it. This is the Model 30 planar, and I'll go through and hold it up to the camcorder. I've got my ring light and other lighting going on here, so I just have to make sure that everything shows up as good as possible. but this is the same effective planar that is in both of these units, the so-called P planar and in this case, I've got, with this particular planar, there's the real-time clock chip that is there on the planar, that MM58167AN is the real-time clock. And the reason I have the blue painter's tape over this is, and I don't really have to worry about these being necessarily erased. They are EPROMs, but these would have to be in the sunlight for quite a bit of time to effectively erase them. I do have an EPROM eraser that I've just recently picked up. It's been amazing that I've gone through and been able to do all the programming of the chips and not necessarily faced with the aspect of going through and needing to erase any as of yet. And I do even have the some more replacement chips that I can program with the BIOSes on order. I had to go through, and with this has the revision 04 BIOS, the last Model 30 BIOS that came out. I burned that to chips just to go through, and I'll check that in further in later videos. And I went through and I had to use the 27C512 chips and to go through and actually lift a pin, lift the leg out of the socket for that highest address line just to get these chips to work. But so my minimal Model 30 here has the revision 00 BIOS. We went through and we checked the character center, the font that's on that from the MCGA video, and I don't have Sims in there. Now that revision 00 BIOS, the real interesting thing was that Major Tom was going through and studying for the setting on the Model 25 BIOS. And here is kind of an alternate Model 25 planar. This is a little bit different than the Type 1 and Type 2 Model 25 planars. It still has all the major components. This is the same functional chips that are on this planar minus the real-time clock. And even the kind of the strange thing between the Model 25 and Model 30 is that most of the chips, not quite all of them, there's some memory chips that are soldered on the planar. These are actually the memory chips. I'm booting up this minimal Model 30 on the bench with no Sims, but the component identification, this in particular, this U17 and U20 for the identifying the ROMs on the board are the same on the Model 25. And those are, kind of hold them up for how they are labeled or silk screened. Okay, so U20 on top here and U22, or I mean, excuse me, U20 and then U17. So I know the effective positions of where these would go when when I would put them on the Model 30 planar, because that's what we're going to do. Major Tom went through and found out that the Model 25 BIOS actually checks for the presence of a real-time clock. So if you had a real-time clock that's at the same address as it is on the Model 30, this BIOS should go through and effectively run that real-time clock chip. And so we're going to go through. I'm going to actually swap the BIOS from this Model 25 planar onto the minimal Model 30. And I do have, in fact, let's put these diskettes down. here. Now the orientation for how the EPROMs are sitting on the planar. There's a view. Like I say, no sims in there at all. And I'm going to get myself back on the screen as well. So there's the ROMs that we're going to go through and pull these from the board. And then I have the ROMs that are on the Model 25 planar, and it's all the same orientation and position ultimately, with the planar sitting in kind of this orientation compared to how the Model 30 is. In other words, overlaid much like this, that those between the U17 and U20. So let me go through. I've got my flat bladed screwdriver, and I'll go through. I'm going to try not to bump the webcam, although it's a really kind of tight, and I don't have this as pinned down. In fact, that might be something to do, just so I'm kind of not working against things. And I need almost more like a hex screwdriver just to get this in the threads a little bit better. I can manage. As long as I get the threads started, we'll use the same flat blade screwdriver just to go down, just to fasten this corner of and we want to make sure we don't slip around with that screwdriver tip, mark up anything. But that's going to fasten down that corner a little bit more. Allows me to get in there and to wedge the EPROMs out. I'm going to go through and I'm going to work with the U17 first off. Now there were 4 revisions done for the Model 30 of its BIOS, including there were 3 that were even dated before the Model 30 was announced on that April 2nd of 1987. There we've got the U17. We're going to leave it in all the same rough orientation, just set off to the side. I'm being very careful with static. I'm trying to ground myself from time to time in going through and working with these. I'm going to go through and I'm going to lift the U17. And wow, that came out kind of easy from the Model 25 planar. And you want to make sure the orientation, your notch on your chip, is on this far side. And so, not going through and bumping the webcam or anything like that too much. Going through, getting that one seated. And we'll go through and pull U20 out. And that is pretty tight. And you have to be really kind of careful because these chips in the socket, so go through and they do almost like a chemical or electrical bonding, or just the metal reacting, the different metals reacting to each other, that they'll actually get kind of stuck in the socket sometimes too. And we set that off to the side to kind of still preserve that same orientation, and going through, bringing U20 And this will be interesting to see for the way that the memory should be identical between the MAL 30 and MAL 25, but typically that 128 KB, it's in dip sockets. It was an option for the MAL 25, and the MAL 25 should be able to remap that just as easily for the MAL 25 BIOS being in there. So let's get switched over. Get switched over to my video capture source, and I'm going to go through and pull down the webcam that I have set up there. And so it counted the memory. And you notice we didn't see anything about a real-time clock or anything like that. So going through, okay, and we have that option number 4, the set time and date. Okay, and indeed that is the current time. We could go through, and this is fully running on the MAL 25 BIOS. I mean, it's there's not anything else interfering. Now I'm going to go through. I'm just going to go through and set it to an hour earlier. Okay, and we'll leave the. Well, let's go through it. Let's go through and set the date to the 2nd of 2022. 35 years from the introduction that we're going to see tomorrow. Okay, I'm going to press the enter key, and it takes us back to the main menu. If we go through and we want to end services, I think it would prompt us to put in a boot diskette. Okay, to restart the star diskette, just press enter. So let's try that. We're just going to boot again. And we're using that diagnostic diskette for this 7496 executive workstation, as we see in that splash screen. And so that was based on the MAL 30 planar. Everything to that executive workstation was the same. And in fact, in reality, we're kind of mimicking that with the 720 KB diskette drive and things like that, and no hard drive in the small 30 case. And of course, it had the SIMs. It had the 512 KB of SIM memory in there to take it up to 640K that the system normally operated on. But if we go through for the set time and date again, we see that has that correct value. It went through, and from the 7496 executive workstation diagnostic diskette, we were able to set the time, and that went through and adjusted exactly the way that it should. I'm going to go through and I'm going to go back to the correct date. Even though it's April Fool, this is not any fooling with things at all. I mean, everything is that I've shown is up front. And so that's kind of cool. Putting in that MAL 25 BIOS, Major Tom discovered that it works with a real-time clock if it's present at the right I/O port address, just like it was on the MAL 30, that the MAL 25 BIOS goes through and works with that. And the MAL 25, normally in the system descriptor table, of a system, the it reports whether a real-time clock chip is installed. In fact, let me go through and just briefly bring up that page. So here's that interrupt 15 hex function C0 hex of get configuration that gets the what's called the system descriptor table. And so in this case, and we can look a little bit more at the BIOS models and BIOS submodels and things like that at a later point, between the MOL 30 and the MOL 25 that came out later on. But there is that bit 5 of feature byte 1 that has where that is set if the real-time clock is available. And so normally for the MOL 25, that real-time clock chip is not present. It's the MOL 25 is the only PS2 that never had a real-time clock to it. And so that bit is cleared in that system descriptor table. And Major Tom, when he looked through, examined the BIOS, he discovered that the MOL 25 actually has 2 system descriptor tables that are listed, and it checks for the presence of a real-time clock so that it can report the correct system descriptor table, whether that real-time clock is installed or not. And so that was quite a surprise. I mean, you think it's not a matter of 35 years, but it's coming pretty close, more than 30 years of that being discovered. And there's also aspects that come in. I mean, what's called the 7690, the clinical workstation, was derived from MOL 25 planar. They used a MOL 25 planar and then put MOL 30 BIOS on that MOL 25 planar, and they had a real-time clock on the riser. And that was designed in particular for that 7690 clinical workstation. So apparently it was not good enough knowledge, or that wasn't well enough known, that they could have just left the MOL 25 BIOS in place, not having to replace it with the MOL 30, because the MOL 25 can run the real-time clock if it's present. This is that's not any sort of April Fool's thing or anything else. It's just amazing that so many years later, this stuff is still being discovered. These odd little details to this under examination that have never come out before. And that's what is an interesting hobby for all that. And so, that's just wild to me. I'm amazed by it. So we've gone through, swapped in there's those MOL 25 BIOS chips, and I'll go through, and I have no interest in keeping them in there or anything like that, but it was really handy to go through there and see those, be able to run that real-time clock chip that's just under the lip there. The real-time clock chip is just right down here, slightly out of view under this drive platform and the diskette drive A. But there's that MOL 25 BIOS in there. So if you thought that this is interesting video and you enjoyed it, go ahead and click on that like button, please. And if you subscribe to my channel, if you've not done so already, recommend it to your friends that they can go through and subscribe to if they're interested in this sort of content. And be sure to try and catch the live stream tomorrow for going over, that 35, commemorating 35 years since those initial PS2s, including the MOL 30 that's there, that commemorating that anniversary date for these units, and still having things discovered and things like that. we'll go through. I'll just have to see how the format is and everything else and how we cover things. I'm just not able to have all those initial models set up on the bench and all that. In fact, I might even have to even have these small 30 still set up here for all that. Still moving things around. But in any regards, I hope to see you then. But this is IBM Museum. That's all I have for now. Thank you.